and to Parrtjima, a Festival in Light 2023. My name is Anyapa and I'll be your host this evening. I would like to begin this evening by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land. Parrtjima respectfully acknowledges the past, present and emerging custodians and ancestors of Mbantua, Alice Springs. We recognise the Marikatui, traditional owners, and Korlunga, caretakers of the land on which we gather tonight. They hold the traditional rights to speak for this regions, and we honour their guidance, advice and blessings for Parrtjima. It is great to see so many people here tonight at the Desert Park, experiencing the magic of Parrtjima and immersing yourselves in our shared culture. Home to the amazing signature light installations and the Rangers Light and Sound Spectacular, the Desert Park Parrtjima site is open every evening from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. The theme for Parrtjima 2023 is Listening with Heart. Sorry, it's very windy up here. Inspired by the artwork surrounding the statement from the heart, Listening with Heart embodies the concepts of coming together, meeting and taking the time to contemplate and reflect the beautiful red centre. There is a growing realisation across the nation that Australia has something incredibly unique, the world's oldest living, adapting culture. And Parrtjima is an invitation from our First Peoples, asking us all to walk together and build a better future. The festival's themes resonate throughout this year's program of live music, talks, films, entertainment, and workshops. Every night we will explore what listening with heart represents to some of Australia's leading artists, musicians, writers and personalities. Thank you for joining us tonight and what has become an annual collective of voices from around the nation. Our talk tonight is called Controlling the Narrative. Our Parrtjima curator, Rhoda Roberts, tonight will speak with J Frankland. Can you please give them a round of applause? From investigating the deaths of Aboriginal people who've died in police custody, making music with the Charcoal Band, writing the play Conversations with the Dead, being the first Indigenous director to win IFI Award, or walking the red carpet at the 1996 Cannes Film Festival with his film No Way to Forget, this proud Gundjamara man opens up about his passion to tell stories often with a twist of humour and Indigenous lands. Please give a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Anyapa. One of our great new young producers and leaders. She is extraordinary, and of course, she's from the lands around Aranda country and Ananu country, having grown up out at Yundamu and Parrtjima. So pretty extraordinary, actually. And she's actually, can I mention what you're working on? So with Ilbidri, which is a theatre company in Melbourne, Anyapa is working as a producer and working with the community to do a new play which will be coming shortly based on the Warumpi band where her dad was one of the members. So keep an eye out for that one. So, J Frankland, Gunditjmara man, has been an extraordinary voice for our people, not only on the stage and in films. And in fact, I think you were one of the very first to go to Cannes on that red carpet to win a Spike Lee award and to do many things in the film space, as well as the music. Charcoal Club. I once asked Richard what was the Charcoal band for, and he said Singed Whites and Burnt Out Blacks. So that gives you an idea of his sense of humour. But let's start going. What is Gunditjmara country to you?
G'day everyone. My country is, I know when you go to other country, until you talk to mob, the land feels empty under your feet until you connect. It changed a bit when I was doing the Deaths in Custody job though, because I was travelling into many different countries talking about the dead, it was a different welcome. It was intrinsically connected. But Gunditjmara in my language means incredibly handsome and Greek-looking Aboriginal. I'll just give you all a bit of a look.
Thanks for humouring him.
Thank you, thank you.
It is beautiful country. I think one of the big things about the Gunditjmara as well is Richard was a soldier, a fisherman, before he got into the creative sector, and indeed the field officer, in fact I think the first for the deaths in custody. But I had the wonderful opportunity of meeting one of your family members who actually, I guess, created a huge legacy, and that was the late Reginald Saunders. Can you just tell us a little bit about why the Defence Forces have played such an important role in your family's dynasty?
So my grandfather on my Gunditjmara side fought at the Somme, and my non-Aboriginal side, my great-grandfather died at the Somme. He was in the Cameronian Rifles. But my grandfather, his mother, was getting the wages, and she tried to buy a house, and of course they said no. And she left that country and then tried to buy land because she wouldn't give up. And she passed before he came back. But we just did an opera on that in Melbourne called No More Sugar, No More Tea. His eldest son was the first Aboriginal commissioned officer, Captain Reg Saunders. And his second eldest son died on the Kokoda. And then I served. The strange thing was, none of us were complete citizens when we were born. And we still had the courage. They had far more than me, in my opinion, and that old lady, of trying to change the nation, being resistant and resilient against enormous traumas. So it was important to me to serve the nation, even though the nation to this day still hasn't served First Nation people adequately.
And on that note, because we labelled this talk controlling the narrative, I think what a lot of our filmmakers and writers do is control the narrative, and particularly our musicians as well. But when I think of you, Richard, and just I want to come back and talk about Conversations with the Dead, because it truly impacted my heart. I've never seen a production like it. It was just because I heard those mothers' voices all the way through, and they were the mothers who had lost their sons in the judiciary and in prison. But you were doing so much more in those earlier days, really controlling the narrative. And I guess in the last few months we've heard the term treaty talked about an awful lot. But in fact, you were talking about it way back before you had that grey hair. Can you tell us how you started on that particular narrative about treaty all those years ago?
So lots of people had been talking about treaty. And treaty to me is about a recognition of us, of humanising what has been dehumanised. And so the state government approached me to facilitate a statewide meeting in Victoria. And I said, sure, I can do that, if I can write what the agenda is. And so they said yes. And so I put up 4 things: a council of elders, a statewide dispute resolution process in our cultural shape, constitutional reform and treaty. And 3 of them got overwhelming support from the first statewide meeting in Victoria for First Nation people in about 4 or 5 years. And that was the beginning of the treaty process that's taken the nation by storm. There was a lady working with me, one of the most impressive people I know, Karen Millwood. We held the stage on that day. And then I went out probably to 30 communities across Victoria. The important thing is we weren't selling the issue of treaty. what we were selling is the most fundamental thing that this nation needs, and that is we're selling hope. And hope is about a whole range of things, but for me personally, a treaty and hope is about unravelling the cultural tapestry of a nation and then weaving it back together in a way where we've all got a home, where our fundamental rights aren't just about legislation. They're not about the moral bankruptcy that we face in this nation. Our fundamental rights are about seeing each other as human. It's about a tomorrow Australia. It's about weaving together a culture and a direction where we have a common vision for victory. And that is that nobody should feel homeless in this country. Nobody should face exclusion because of race or heritage. Nobody should be downtrodden. There should be nobody feeling morally bereft or abandoned by our nation. Our direction should be simple. If I'm doing ceremony on my country and I have non-Aboriginal children seeing me as uncle or father, then they should be doing ceremony with me. In essence, it simply means this. I'm not going to be bloody assimilated, but I'm going to assimilate every white fella I come across, and I'm going to love yous to death.
And yeah, he is a lover, not a fighter, I've got to say.
But I love to fight for love.
You came up with a great saying a number of years ago, and it always stuck. And it was with art and culture. Yep.
I believe you don't need a rifle or a bomb to change a nation. I believe there's great ways to do it. And when you've got art, you've got voice. And with voice comes responsibility. When you've got art, you've got voice. When you've got voice, you've got a semblance of freedom. And with freedom comes a type of responsibility. And with that comes hope. And it's nation changing. Every artist I see, particularly First Nation artists, they're trying to change the nation. They're trying to keep stories of the old alive, chart new ways forward. I mean, this is nation changing. It's nation building. I see everybody feeling welcome and strong here. Do you all feel welcome and strong here? Can you be a bit more vocal? Do you all feel welcome and strong here? So therefore it's nation building, yeah? So this is what art does. You can talk this after me, yeah? When you've got art, you've got voice. When you've got voice, you've got freedom. Someone stuffed that up. Who stuffed that up? Did you stuff that up? We'll start again, all right? When you got art, you got voice. When you got voice, you got freedom. With freedom comes responsibility. So, Peter Dutton, you mophead, are you being responsible with our freedom? Sorry, I shouldn't be that cheeky, should I? Oh, he's a mophead. Sorry. Am I allowed to call politicians' names up here?
I think so.
Thank you, darling.
But I think that's an interesting point you touch on, because for the first time in our history, I guess, we're seeing Australians are seeing how diverse we are as a group of people. I mean, we all have varying opinions. We have different political aspirations.
But every blackfella bags for Collingwood.
I think there will be a few who will dispute that.
Right, okay, I see. Like
And you had to say AFL. I mean, the Rabbitohs, come on.
I don't even know.
But it's an interesting thing because our footballers do make change and they bring things to attention, whatever code they're in. And, you know, when I think 30 years ago, I got the wonderful opportunity to employ a sports broadcaster for our radio show. And the reason we got him, bless him, he was good looking and nice.
Thank you.
But he'd actually lifted his T-shirt at a football match because he just couldn't take it any longer. And that, of course, was Nicky Winmar. And he became a great sports presenter for our show. But to think, here we are, and we're still seeing Latrell cop things. Recently in the AFL, there was another young player who lifted his shirt to demonstrate that if it's on the sporting field, which is supposedly a level playing field, then where else is it in our society? And I use that as a bit of an analogy. I'm trying to use big words here with the writer here. But I just want to go and look at how you controlled that narrative. Like, we see that racism in sports, but of course we all know there is systemic behaviours that exist in our institutions. So with Conversations with the Dead, I really don't know the strength it took for you to unburden everything you'd heard as a field officer and to actually put that in a production with actors who had to go through that cultural amnesia and those stories every single night. And it was incredibly moving. But the biggest point, I will get to the question, the biggest point was that what I was seeing on the stage were these men telling these stories as performers that were based on truth-telling. But it was the philosophy of those men the stories were about was the way they looked at land. It was about obligation and responsibility and connection, or waterways or sky country. And yet they're in a system where everything was about a financial transaction.
So the job is probably the hardest I've ever done. Well, no, it is. And I was employed on a 3-month renewable contract for 4 years, and I covered 2.5 states. My job was to know everything about people who'd passed in custody and their families, their traditional country, how much they weighed when they were born, particularly the last 48 hours of their life. And I covered Victoria, Tassie and bits of New South Wales, and the discrimination was pretty much through the roof. It's lots of racial slurs and lots of trauma. You got to see the world through a mother's tears sometimes, which is a difficult sight for a man, because women are connected to Mirang, Mother Earth, in a different way, and you become a conduit for the stories. So you end up knowing secrets that you never tell anyone, and you seen things which are quite horrid. So you shift your job from investigating deaths to trying to prevent deaths. And you do battle, and you're constantly targeted in all sorts of ways. And there was some really... I was the only black fellow for quite a few years in those states. In New South, there was 2 other fellows. They were really good men. Barry Kane and Shane Phillips, good, solid people. The discrimination, I came to realise, I got invited to this dinner party, and I got to tell a bit of a yarn, yeah? On the way to the dinner party, there was a racist bloke in a service station, and first he pushed me with his eyes, and I stepped around that a bit. Then he pushed me with his words, you know. And being a young fella, because I was only 25, I stepped back again. Then when he touched me, I heard him. And I got to the dinner party. And at the dinner party, this woman says to me, "So tell me, why do your people kill themselves in jail?" 3 things struck me quite amazingly. The first was your people, the assumption that we were all the same. And it illustrated to me this incredibly cultural divide and racial divide. The second was the assumption that everyone killed themselves. And this simply wasn't true. People were dying because of violence and chronic illness, and sometimes by their own hand. The third was her tone of voice indicated to me really clearly that our misery was an inconvenience to her. And I realised that the guy in the service station was just somebody who I could punch out and beat up and eat his spirit and hurt him forever. And I realised that the job was much bigger. The job was about changing the social conditioning of a nation. It was actually, in all that grief, it was actually about love. The job was actually about learning that grief is love. That people who are racist are often very sick and need to be healed. And if they can't be healed, they need to be cast aside. People who hate don't know what it is to love, or they're too scared to. So once I seen that, I took a step on another journey, and I decided to use art as a voice. And I decided that night that I wanted to change a nation. Then one day I got real cocky and thought, I want to change the world. So that's what I'm doing.
And those young men who were performing those words, where you were controlling the narrative and telling the truth of the story. I think it was one of the first productions where there was consideration for what those actors would go through every night. And so, which I think led to another arm of what you do with counselling and...
Yeah, I work in, do a lot of counselling work, and I go to communities where there's a lot of pain and grief, sometimes lots of suicides. And I I listen to people, and I talk about different levels of trauma. It's quite overwhelming at times. There's about 6 different stand-up traumas. Transgenerational trauma. This is the one where you're lamenting everything you've lost, and you realise that invasion or colonisation is a structure and not an event. It's not just a one-off thing. It continues today. And Captain Cook is still landing on every First Nation person, man, woman and child. And until we win against this discrimination, will continue to land on us. This is why we have suicides and chronic illness. The second one is discrimination trauma, being followed in shops or treated badly or excluded from jobs. The next is navigating the dominant culture, which is really difficult because we have to do it all the time. I mean, I rarely get hired as a man, as a human. I always get hired as a First Nation person. The next one is vicarious trauma, constantly telling these stories. The next one is the complexity of our lives, being able to go to 10 funerals, 15 funerals a year, and navigating all of those things. And all of these traumas, they can sometimes compound together and create a super trauma. And it's hard. And when we look at the cultural loads of our non-Aboriginal brothers and sisters, particularly our allies stepping across, it's almost like they have to step into another world and they end up with a trauma. That's sort of the work I do. I also do individual briefing people. But one thing I do, which I want to encourage all of you to do, every Christmas, ring up 7 people that you know, whether you agree with them politically or not, and tell them thank you for what they do on the front line of trying to make the world a better place. I do that every year. Sometimes I've had a couple of glasses of Shiraz and I dial a wrong number, but I still do it. Watch out if you get a phone call.
And thank you, Richard, and thank you for being I'm not sure what the word is, but thank you, brother, for sharing that sort of breakdown of what often a lot of our mob goes through. And it's sort of when you see that, you tend not to look at them. You tend to remind yourself circumstances, and it shifts your gaze, and it's a good thing. And the other thing that you do most amazingly is, you know, we talk about art being an incredible healing, the use of our language. And thank you last night, and our brother Lee Morgan as well. If you weren't here, it was wonderful to hear these men from South call to the Arunta in language to thank them for having us as visitors on this very ancient red earth. But I guess, you know, and that healing we see all the time, but it's the music. You know, music is so universal, and you can put so much in music. And you've actually shifted a little bit in the last, year, and sort of gone back to music in a way. And you've got this whole new album, whole lot of work that you're working on. And can I tell them about you? Richard sent me...
Not too much.
No, that's about the music. Oh, I could tell you stories. But he did recently get married, and congratulations, and that's just wonderful.
That's a big story.
That's a big story.
Do you want me to tell that story? You want to hear a personal story?
Yeah.
My wife Sal and Bona's son Lockie are sitting there in his $30 hat. So I'll tell you what happened, right? COVID kicked in, and I ended up with shingles. Has anyone ever had shingles? A very painful experience. And then I had this lump out the side, and they thought it was some type of cancer. So I was living there in this house by myself, and I've got a cat called Tedward Hemingway Franklin III, who's a catnip addict. So Teddy's stoned, and I got some medicinal cannabis, like legal stuff. And so I was sitting there with the opioids, the Valium, the shingles painkillers, the Yandi, which is marijuana, and Teddy's stoned on catnip. We're under the fairy lights on the veranda. And I knew I was taking too many drugs and drinking too much Guinness and single malt whiskies when Teddy turned around and winked at me, and he's an orange cat. And I thought that was bad enough, but then he said, "That's good shit." So I gave everything up and decided I'm not going to die in a hospital. I'll go to Ukraine and help out somehow, like ferrying people out of the war or something. And so I spoke to Deb, who's one of the managers I've got. That's Deb over there. She's tour managing, poor thing, tour managing this trip. And she said, "I know someone called Sal. She's a good worker." So I rang Sal up, and Sal came in for an interview. I happened to be wearing a possum skin mankini and standing there like this. A bit like that Steve fella that was here before, eh? Flapping his mum cheeks around. No, I was cooking a 5-meat stew after about the third week of working together. And she just said to me straight up, "You're HBD. I said, "What's that?" She said, "Hot, black and deadly. I'm going to marry you." She seduced me because of a 5-meat stew. There she is, Estelle. We'll just give everyone a wave there. That's the truth. That's exactly what happened.
That is fabulous.
Thank you. And so I never went to Ukraine. I had to fight. Sal's last name is Poland, so I had to fight Poland. That's why I never got to Ukraine.
Anyway, you've got more music coming out.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And you're going to be performing here as well.
Oh, tomorrow night?
Yes.
Yes, tomorrow night.
So tomorrow night you can catch him on the music stage.
There's a few band members here. Can I introduce them?
Yeah.
There's Ash Dargan. Just stand up, Ash, and say hello.
Oh, hi.
And there's Lee Morgan. Where's Marcus? Are you there, Marcus? Go on, stand up. Don't be shy. Marcus owes me $50. Just and there's Nalusha there. You there? Is that everybody? Have we missed anyone? Oh, and Deb, who's organising us? Thanks. So is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. So there's this new music. But
new music, sorry.
Yeah, and, you know, I remember going to your music for the charcoal.
The Charcoal Club for burnt out blacks and singed whites.
Yep.
Any singed whites here? Just put your hands up, please.
And it was fantastic. But you sent me a thing on my phone the other week, a beautiful song, I See You.
I see you,
Can you,
woman.
can you talk about that?
So,
Are you going to sing that here?
yeah, we'll sing it tomorrow night.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting song because it's this young black fella, well, old black fella, singing about
Women's
women.
grief. So we, in the life I've led, I got to see a lot of grief. And incidentally, yesterday was the anniversary of my brother's death. He was 16. And I remember when my mother was told, when we were all told. And I remember seeing so many women that had lost family. And the grief changed, seeing that changed everything I believed about grief. I think when I go bush and reflect on it, just how Mother Earth gives birth and feels the spirit coming, I think a woman feels that spirit come into her body. And we men, we never get to feel that. We get to be guardians of that. And she feels the body grow. And there's a connection that's beyond our understanding. And I wanted to write that I see that. And so the song is about, I see you, woman. I see the scars on your soul. When a woman loses her child, you see that child's footprints on the land. So I wanted to talk about that circle of life. And would you like me to answer that?
Yeah, that's it's Peter Dutton.
Oh, thank God. I've been waiting to talk to him.
That's my alarm so that we can go to you and hear questions.
Oh, okay. I'll just
but
finish this.
you finish that, yeah.
So I wanted to write about that circle and what it's like to be a man to see that and not see it good enough ever. To try and find that humility. I don't think I'll ever see it clearly, but I see it enough to feel it with respect.
Thank you, Richard. That is lovely. And I hope you get to see it tomorrow night because it is a great song. So, Anyapa's going to be walking around with the mic. If you've like to ask Richard a question, you can pop your hand up and just step forward a bit or just stand up and Richard will be able to answer everything.
Anybody would like to ask a question?
You don't have to either. That's okay.
Yeah, you don't have to ask a question.
Which one? Gunditjmara? Yeah, I'm Gunditjmara. Yeah, Western District, Victoria. We're known as the Fighting Gunditjmara. We fought a Umarilla war down there for a long time. Still fighting. Sometimes amongst ourselves.
Hello. You said that you were wanting to change the world. You started from changing a nation and changing the world from there. What sort of notions would you like to bring forward in that? I was just curious about that.
Oh, there's a lot of different worlds for people, isn't there? Different cultures believe there's multiple worlds. I reckon the biggest world and biggest battle you can fight is changing the world within yourself. I think the first challenge is we challenge the inner racist, whether it's black on black, black on white, white on black. Try and learn that really basic. I wrote 7 principles when I used to get a lot of foster kids. And they're called the Kareen principles, the south wind. One time I got busted up a bit overseas and I thought I was on the way out. And I came home and I sat down and that south wind can blow the scars off your soul a bit. And so I started to change my world a bit. I think the idea of changing the world is you change your own world first and then watch it change as you think you're changing others. You never really change anything except yourself.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Just raise your hand.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you speak tonight. You actually brought tears to my eyes. And I really am looking forward to seeing your production and learning more about you. And I'm definitely going to follow up and definitely be here tomorrow night to listen to you play. So, yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm such a timekeeper. Sorry, Anyapa, you go.
You're right. Any more questions? And then we can wrap up. No? All good?
Must have scared the corny out of you. I got a question for you, Mob. Yeah? Would you help me sing a little language prayer song? You sure? You ready? So you just repeat after me. Yeah. Do pringel do pringel do pringel do pringel do natuk miring yi natuk miring yi do now soft do. You want me to tell you what you said? Gee, that old black man's hot. No, what you said was thank you, spirits. You said that a couple of times, and you said I'm on country. Now, you know where country really is? Right in here. You know when you love someone or you're kind to someone, you give them a piece of your country. It's the best gift you can give. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. And I hope, and that was wonderful. Gosh, things are meant to be, aren't they? I hope as you walk through the festival, you do listen with heart, because we need each other's hearts. It's about kindness. And, you know, it's so funny when you were saying something really profound, that music was just like it was almost the underscore that it was supposed to happen. So I hope you get the chance to go see the Rangers show. It's really special. There's a moment in the Rangers show, and it is about country. I'm very blessed to get to work with some of the most amazing knowledge holders. And one of our knowledge holders passed from Umbantua recently. And so there's a lot of stories around Alice Springs about the tree and the foundation of the tree and why it's so important. So we were able to put that into the Rangers show. And it was just wonderful for his family to hear that. That is Judy Trigger singing. She gifted us that song. She's the most senior songwoman at Mutijulu. She's now in aged care and she's one of the senior dancers. And she wants to pass this song on to her granddaughters because it's about the Marla story at Uluru. So I think that's a beautiful note to end on. Anyapa, take it away.
Thank you, Rhoda, and thank you, Richard. Please join me in showing our appreciation for that amazing insight. And a beautiful big round of applause for Richard and Rhoda. It was incredibly beautiful and overwhelming, so thank you so much. And I hope you have a beautiful evening. Thank you.